Welcome to Season 4 of Might in Motion, the podcast that champions motivation, momentum, mindfulness, and might. I'm Mariana Kinney, your host, bringing you conversations with inspiring leaders and innovators who challenge the status quo and push boundaries in their careers and lives. Whether you're here to grow, lead, or ignite your own journey, we're here to keep you moving forward. Let's dive in. Today, I am thrilled to bring to you Harrison Stockeland, who is an author. In 2023, his debut novel, Watch It Burn, was quickly followed by November's Whisper later that same year. And in 2024, he released his first ever full-length Western novel, Amongst Thieves. He is currently working on his fourth novel, Lake Country, which is coming soon. Harrison, thank you so much for joining us on Might in Motion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I have been looking forward to this. We met a few months ago, mutual connection, and I was like, man, Harrison's got such an interesting just story and path at such an early age. And I love that. I love that about you. And I think your story is very inspirational, and hopefully it sparks some excitement in others to be creative. When you and I first talked, we talked a little bit about, growing up, you had a desire to be in the arts, but you tried some instruments without much success.
Yeah.
I remember you
Yeah.
mentioning that. It took you a minute to figure out that writing was your best medium of art. How did you figure that out? What was kind of your path to get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been kind of interesting, the correlation between me and art. I guess I was never really like the artsy kind of kid. Like, I wasn't, in the theater groups or things like that. I enjoyed art class. I enjoyed that kind of side of school and growing up and all that. I had a lot of fun, and I had I guess a probably pretty strong appreciation for art. Um, since I was younger. I really enjoyed comic books. One of my uncles is an illustrator, so I always loved like hanging out with him and working on drawings and stuff. I don't know, I saw a certain light in some of those projects and that artwork that people would put out. So naturally, I wanted to kind of follow that path and do some drawing and maybe be a comic book illustrator. Even though I'm about probably 40 years too young to be in that business anymore, but so I started drawing and things like that, and I practiced and I do it all the time. It was my favorite thing to do, but I just never got better at it. I never really got good at it. It was just kind of something I did for fun, and then as you get older, it falls off. So I was in high school and I kind of just stopped doing that because I was in sports and all that stuff and had other things to do. I was dealing with algebra, trying to figure that out, and so I ran out of time to do the drawing, and I just kind of stopped. And then COVID came around, and everybody had at least 2 weeks of doing absolutely nothing. And a little side note, I hope this is a story for a lot of people. I think it will be coming out that they found their passions during COVID. But yeah, I didn't have anything to do. I was 16, just about to turn 17, when COVID hit that March, when everything closed down. And you can only play Xbox for so long. Up until then, I thought you could play Xbox forever and ever and never get bored of it. But that's not true when you have 2 straight weeks of nothing to do. So, I got bored of the Xbox. So I decided to do some reading. I had some books that had been kind of collecting dust. Everybody has that to read list that they don't necessarily get to. And so I started knocking those out, and I really enjoyed some of the books I was reading. I was reading literary fiction, mostly Dennis Lehane. I kind of had a stack of his books that I wanted to get through. And I remember reading through one of his books, Darkness Take My Hand, and thinking, man, I bet I could write something like this. Like, this would be, really fun if I could create a story like this. And I'd always loved movies. I'm a huge movie guy. I probably one of the few authors that'll tell you they like movies more than they like books. It's just I've just always loved movies. And up until then, I kind of thought that the magic behind movies was like the acting or the directing or that kind of thing. But if you have really bad writing, a movie's no good. And I sort of started realizing that around the same time. And so I was like, man, I want to write like a really colorful, interesting story. And so I just sat down with my laptop. I had a school laptop, and just sat down with that and started writing. And it took me a while, but I made it about 140,000 words, finished my first book, and it's terrible. It's like the worst thing you'll ever read. I tried my best. I worked really hard at it. It just wasn't good, right? It's your first attempt at something, and it took me a couple months. I just sat in my office and wrote. And then I was like, well, that was an interesting experience. I'm gonna try another one. So I literally finished that Word document, opened a new one, and started the next story. I kind of had some stories saved up. And I did about three more of those practice books, and then I wrote Watch It Burn, and I was ready to publish.
I like how you called them practice books. I think it shows that there's iteration whenever you're doing anything, when you're creating, when you're doing, projects at work and that sort of thing. There are that, I always call it, fail fast, right? You want to
Yeah.
fail fast so that you can iterate and then grow and get better at whatever, that thing that you're working towards. And it's interesting that you kind of bring up comic books, and maybe you were 40 years too young for it. I'll tell you, like, I have two young kids, and they are drawing comic books right now. Like, they've created characters and all the things, and so I don't. Maybe it's making a comeback. So maybe you
I
should.
hope it is. I tell you what, I loved those comic books growing up. That same uncle was a comic book collector, and
Uh-huh.
he would kind of give me his extras and stuff. So I had like my own little collection, and that was just a blast. I absolutely love those.
That's really, really cool. How did, like, it sounds like you have a kind of a family that encouraged trying different things,
Yeah.
and even, because you said you weren't artsy, but you had this art influence in your past. You know, as a parent, what's there some things that you thought, hey, my parents got this right, and it helped encourage me go after what might have been a unique career path?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I'm not from a like an arts and crafts kind of household. My parents are both in the business world. My mom is a serial entrepreneur, I guess I'd call her, and my dad has been in corporate America for, as long as I can remember. So it's not really the type of household you'd think would be like, a great, like art ground, somewhere that would build up, that side of me. It was more just so the encouragement of like, hey, I mean, if you're interested in it, you might as well try it and give it a shot, do it, have fun. Um, that's one thing that's amazing about them. Like they always encourage that side of me. It's never really been like, well, we want you to do this, so go try that. It's just been like, hey, if you're interested in it, stop talking about it and just actually give it a shot and go for it. And that's kind of something I've carried over into my personal life. I'll tell friends or people I know, maybe a little too harshly sometimes, but like, you've been talking about that too much. You need to actually just go do it. And that sounds really, really simple, but you'd be surprised how many people don't actually take that first step. And I mean, like, I had nothing to lose. Why not, start writing? And it's going to be horrible. Like, I'll tell you right now, if you're going to write a book, your first one's going to be really bad, or at least your first draft, right? Your first time through is just not going to be a masterpiece. So, just coming to terms with that and just understanding that you just have to take that first step. I think they were very encouraging in that.
I love that. That is great advice, I think, for parents, but anybody who's leading a team, and just encouraging people to go and try things
Absolutely.
is 100% like important. Now, when you're writing your novels, you weave in historical elements. What
Yeah.
inspired you to do that? And, like,
Yeah.
yeah, really, what was the inspiration for that?
Well, that's a good one. I mean, so my first novel, Watch It Burn, is about mobsters in the 1980s, and I had somebody ask me, an older gentleman asked me, he was like, "What do you know about what's your connection to the 1980s? You were born in 2003, right? Like, what's your connection to the 1980s?" And I kind of came up with a quick little clever answer. I told him, "Well, Martin Scorsese's my connection to the 1980s. Like, that's kind of my window into that time frame, is those movies that were just huge blockbusters from back then, especially the mobster films. You're talking about a mobster book, right? You got to have some of that flair from those movies. So that, I guess, to answer the question, it's the influence I had growing up. I mean, my wife thinks it's hilarious, but I didn't really watch a lot of cartoons growing up. I don't know if it was really like my parents just didn't want me to watch cartoons, or I just wasn't interested in them. I can't really remember, but I loved Me TV on the satellite network. You could watch all the old shows, so Gunsmoke, Bonanza, all those westerns, Magnum PI, MacGyver, things like
Nice.
that are just awesome shows. And so I grew up watching stuff that was that took place, in what was then the modern era, but long before I was born. And I absolutely loved all those shows. There's definitely a lot of key-ins, especially from the westerns in my my western novel.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's been a huge inspiration. And it's also kind of a little bit of a hack when you're writing crime books because, cell phones are an author's biggest enemy. I would think. I've never actually written a book that takes place in the time of cell phones. So I think that's a big help. You don't have people calling each other and getting out of circumstances with their, Google Maps or whatever. Like it's more interesting, it's more personal. Um, I really love localized fiction, and I think removing some of the complications we have today, maybe even if you're talking about some of like social issues or things like that, being able to remove some of that and just step back into what would be a, I don't know if simpler time is the right way to say it, but just a different time, that maybe some readers, some of my readers that are my age, right, might not be used to, and so it's a different environment for them too, and I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that you're watching stuff from, the 60s, 70s, 80s, right?
Yeah,
And we were talking, you probably might be able to hear in the background, but my kids are watching MacGyver right now, and the original MacGyver. And
yeah,
there's something magical about them going, wait, there's no phone. I don't understand,
yeah,
and being
exactly.
able to talk through that was the times back then.
Yeah. Like we got to rush to get them a fax. Like they're rushing to a fax machine to send a message. Like it's crazy. A lot different than what we live in now. So
Oh my god.
yeah.
There was one the other day and the guy was on the computer. Oh, we actually
Yep.
watched an episode of Alf, which I don't know
Okay.
if you ever
Yeah.
watched Alf, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so the alien gets on a computer and he's doing something and they're like, what is that? I'm like, well, that's what computers used to look
Yeah. It's
like,
like the original
the
computer.
green
Yep.
screen of things. And
Yep.
so like, man, how far we have come. Now they're using Chat GPT to create, stories or images or whatever,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. And
know.
that's crazy to me. Like the whole AI thing coming out is just it's insane. It's bonkers.
Yes, yes, because you literally can put together something, but it's not necessarily yours, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's crazy. Um, so we just mentioned AI and the fax machine, and I kind of giggle a little bit because we have both a background in supply chain, and people are going to be like, "Wait, what? Harrison has a background
Yeah.
in supply
Where do
chain?"
you fit that in? Right.
I
Yeah.
know, like, how did
Yeah.
this happen? But you mentioned like the fax machine, and I always joke that the biggest advancement in trucking was the invention of the fax machine, right? And then,
Yeah.
now I'm in a space where we're actually digitizing things and actually bringing drivers and carriers into, the current century. Um, what tell us maybe a little bit about your background, where you touch supply chain, and what have you learned from that space that you now can apply in being an author?
Yeah. I mean, I've been adjacent to over the road trucking for my entire life. My dad, as long as I can remember, I think maybe for a year or two after I was born, he was still working with airplanes. But after that, he got into trucking on the dispatch side. And then, as long as I can remember, he worked for several different trucking companies. The first was based out of Fargo, North Dakota. And then we moved to Grand Forks, and he worked for a Canadian-based trucking company, Bison USA, for many many years. So I was around all that for a long time. I grew up kind of going to the office and getting to meet those people and see the backside of our everyday lives, right? Like without trucks, nothing happens. We noticed some of that during COVID and just with the supply chain issues. I mean, truckers are a huge deal. Um, and yeah, I think it's amazing. So, anyways, after high school, I had the opportunity to go and apply for an internship at the Truckload Carriers Association in Washington D.C., and that was a fantastic experience. So, for those of you that might not know, they lobby on behalf of the truckload industry in Washington D.C. with our politicians, and so I got to go out there and work in their government affairs department for a few months, and that was amazing. They're great people. I had a really good time. It was a lot of fun. I actually got to work as an intern. I wasn't just like getting coffee and ordering lunch and stuff like that. I actually got to work and go to Capitol Hill and meet some of these politicians that you see on the news every night. It was a very, very, very interesting experience. And through that, I guess it kind of, the messages I've been hearing my whole life kind of hit home, and I realized how important the truckload industry really is. There's issues going on at the time. I mean, still a big problem today, but truck parking was a huge one for us back then. It was in 2021, and just not having enough spaces in the country for trucks to park. If you go out driving, at any time of the night, anywhere near your home, you're going to see trucks parked on the on and off ramps, which is actually illegal, but there's nowhere for them. There's nowhere else for them to park. And if they keep driving, they're going to go over their hours. So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Because of that. So there's things like that that you just don't notice. You could be frustrated, every morning you're going to work, has another truck parked on the off ramp or whatever, but it's really out of necessity because they don't have anywhere else to go. So there's things like that. It's really interesting to see the backside, how the trucker's day is run. Those guys work so hard. You might just think, well, man, I'm just sitting behind the wheel, of a truck all day. And I mean, imagine, how volatile it gets on the road, just driving to work and back, right? Imagine doing that all day, every day for your full 11 hours. And that's the other side of it, is most of them, they don't get their full 11 hours because they're sitting in a loading dock somewhere, waiting for paperwork, waiting for their turn in line, especially at the harbors. So it's really interesting to learn all of that. And then you walk into a grocery store and you understand that everything in there was on a truck just a day or two before. I think it's a great perspective, and it's a unique perspective for sure. As for how it's helped in my writing career, I don't know that there's a lot of translation there, but I think my time working with the folks at TCA was definitely a monumental time in my life. They were great people. It was my first time in a professional setting. And it was just a really unique experience to be able to lobby on Capitol Hill. I know a lot of people don't get to say that they've done that, and that's pretty neat.
That's awesome. Maybe you have a future book, I mean,
Yeah, there you
like
go.
you got truck
The
drivers going all
lobbyist.
across the
Yeah.
country solving murder mysteries, maybe there's a serial killer in there somewhere. I don't know. But
Who
like
knows? Who knows?
it's a very rough life. I
Yeah,
had kind of the privilege, in college of working for Saia Motor Freight and spent a summer riding around with day freight drivers, and doing time studies. And it shattered my mindset of what a truck driver is, right?
yeah,
Like, I thought it was all like Roadhouse or something, and like,
yeah,
no,
right.
there were guys who had their doctorates and that, just didn't want to go into an office anymore and wanted to be their own boss and manage their own time. It's really amazing, I think, to see the awareness, in the United States shift over COVID and understanding how much an impact a driver has
Absolutely.
on their day-to-day life. And to your point, like, just be aware of them on the road and have some,
Yeah,
give them some grace, man. Like,
yeah,
a hard
yeah.
life, to do. Um, so you mentioned you learned a lot by, being a lobbyist and helping there, an intern there. Did you take lessons from that allow you now to stay motivated and on track when you're writing? Like, how do you hold yourself accountable through your writing process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of your 4 M's really stood out to me as something that keeps me motivated, momentum. I think that's huge. I try to keep the momentum up as high as possible. I try to keep moving forward, 'cause the work just gets easier from there. It's easier to work longer and harder. And I think that's something I've done a pretty good job with. I figured out early in life, thankfully. But just consistency, keeping that momentum up. I think, yeah, making sure that that I'm set up for success for the next day, if that makes sense. You can't really leave the desk until your next day is set up for success. And by doing that, you don't delay any work that needs to be done. You do what's required, and all of a sudden you've got a book in 3 or 4 months, and it's a great feeling once it's done. Sometimes you want to go watch TV or you want to go do something else, but and there's a time and a place for that. I've gotten pretty in tune with my mental, I guess, capacity, my bandwidth for writing. Like if I have a really long day doing something else and I'm just wore out, I could sit down and pound out 1,000, 2,000 words, but I'm gonna have to go back and rewrite it all anyways because it'll be terrible, right? It'll be short sentences or too long sentences, really bad dialogue that's flat. Like, so you got to know. You also have to know when you need a break, but I think keeping that momentum up, working hard. Right before we got on this podcast interview, I was writing, and when we log off, I'm gonna keep writing. I still got some more to do this evening, so it's just something you do. Yeah, consistency, and I love the momentum. I think that's a great one as well.
Hey, listeners, I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am. If you're finding value in these insights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you're listening. Your support helps us reach more people and bring even more inspiring guests to the show. Let's keep building this incredible community together.
Well, it seems like you tie into momentum and mindfulness, that whole being
Yeah,
in
of
tune
course.
with your own energy and where you are, that level. Do you have a set routine that you like to follow during a day that allows you to have that consistency that you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, so I still work a day job. So I'm usually working from like 6 to 3, and then I go to the gym and stuff. So my writing's all done in the evening. I'm not a morning writer. I think even when I become a full time author, I won't be writing early in the morning. I'm not a morning person. My brain's not really clear and ready to go early. So my writing's mostly done in the evening. I don't have like a set routine. I write almost every day, write or edit. So in my process, I will write the whole first draft. I don't go over anything a second time. I don't touch a chapter once I'm done with it. And then I come back through and what I call edit, right? My editor's probably out there laughing somewhere, but I run through everything, make sure that there's no, plot holes or like, someone lights a cigarette and then 2 pages later they light another cigarette. Like it just doesn't, like this dude's smoking way too much. So things like that. Um, or like, watch out for some, weird era inappropriate thing like that doesn't make any sense. So I run through, just look for continuity errors, make sure everything's good to go, and then I pass it off to my editor. And then I work on the next project. I'm very strict about only working on one project at a time. Uh, I I would get too distracted if I find something else that's interesting. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna start on this one. And we'll leave that one for later. So I finished everything I've started working on, except for one that was a premature story that I just jumped into too early. I had finished a different novel and I had another one lined up, but I was like, I like this story better. And I jumped in and I didn't know where I was going with it. So I had to abandon that about 5 to 10 chapters in. But other than that, I just keep moving forward.
How do you know where you're going with a story? Do you have like an outline that you start with, or to continue to make sure you've got that consistent storyline?
No, I've never really used outlines. I have a whiteboard that I'll write down like what the next couple chapters are going to be, just so I can kind of, I don't know, if I write it down, it's almost like I have a better grip on it, right? It's not just some misty thought. Um, but Stephen King said once the best way to immortalize a bad idea is to write it down. And I think that's really really true. I think if you sit down before you've even met your own characters and you kind of write their whole plot, their whole place in the world you're going to create, it's a really great way to make a mediocre story. I don't know about you, but I've definitely read a lot of books and seen a lot of movies where you can tell that before they even met these characters, they had their whole lives planned out. And that's not to say I don't have the plot planned out in my head. I have a very clear start point, a very clear end point, a lot of core tenets that go throughout the book. But normally, so much changes over the course of 100,000 words and 4 or 5 months or 6 months of writing that you're not going to end up in the same place that you thought you were, and your characters are not the same people that you thought they were when you came up with them. I'm a big believer in the fact that um, they're malleable, right? They change while you're writing. You learn more about them, not in the sense that they're real people, obviously, but you learn more about your literary creation and how they interact with the world you've put out there. So I think writing an outline, it might work for some people if you're really easily distracted or you like having a benchmark or things like that. I think it would work real well for you. Maybe it's just not something I've ever tried or really thought about doing, just because I know it'd be a great way to trap me. And it's less exciting because if you're supposed to do this in this chapter and that in that chapter, but you come up with a new idea and you want to work it in, well, you can't because you have to get to this point, and it's just, I don't know, it just kind of seems like a great way to immortalize bad ideas.
I like that. I like how you talk about characters being malleable. It struck me because as a leader of teams, and I've led so many teams over the past 2 decades, if you have a set in your mind who somebody is,
Yeah,
and
of
then
course.
they become that person. No matter what they do, you've
Yep, it's
already
hard to change
determined
it.
their end,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
there's been many times where I've actually challenged, oh, that person, we need to let them go. Hey, let's give them a chance. Let's give them a chance to rewrite and remarket themselves, right? And then all of a sudden they turn around in everybody's eyes. Oh my God, I saw this great turnaround. Well, I had a different perception. My perception is this person is valuable. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not. They're not. Their destiny is not locked in stone. So I kind of like that you do that with your characters. Is it
Yeah.
makes it resonated with me on a just how I deal with regular people, not just people in a book.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's a great way to make the characters seem more genuine, right? Because that's every author wants you to believe the story you're reading, right? Nobody likes reading or watching a movie where you understand exactly like, oh, it's a movie, but it's fun, you know? You want you want your audience to believe what you're writing, and I think having characters that go through what would be a more natural progression than if you just assigned their destiny right off the bat. Um, and maybe you have their endpoint, but everything else in the middle is fair game, and I think that just makes for a more real character, which makes for a more real story.
Sometimes I ask my guests if they could go back in time and give advice, to their who they were 5, 10 years ago, what would it be? But because of where you are, I want to know what
Yeah,
advice you would like to give your future self 5, 10 years from now. What would you like to tell Harrison
that's
in the
interesting.
future?
Yeah, 10 years ago I was 11, so I'm not sure what I would have told him. Keep playing with Legos or something like that. I don't know.
The Xbox
But
for 2 weeks straight is not exactly fun.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, 5 to 10 years from now. Yeah, that's an interesting one. It'd be weird to see, like, where I was at that point. Interesting to see what levels I'd reached, what how the career's doing, how the books are doing. But I think I'd say, keep it simple, right? Easy to make things complex, and I think keep it simple is never bad advice. I don't think anything really needs to be super complex. And so that'd probably be my first one if I just had to shoot one out in the dark. And I'd say keep working hard. I think that would be the next thing is like complacency would be an easy one. The last thing I want to do is be the guy that turns out 2 books a year, which, by the way, is a crazy rate. I'm trying to keep up with that. 2 books a year is my goal. I'm going to hit it again this year, but that is, man, that's a lot of work. So I could see, I hope I wouldn't, but I could see that becoming a temptation to just kind of slow it down, maybe write one a year, one every other year, whatever, maybe let the characters and the story lag a little bit. And it's just, I make money off of each book, so I might as well just put one out. Like, you don't want to become that guy. Everybody knows an author or a filmmaker or any creative or a singer songwriter, any of those people, even employees like you're talking about on teams. You all know somebody who has reached what you'd consider a great height, and then they just sort of like, yeah, that's fine, I'm just gonna meet the status quo, and then maybe not meet the status quo, and then sort of perform poorly. And I just don't want to be that guy. So I'd say keep working hard and stay consistent with your quality.
I love it. This has been a really cool conversation. And if people are interested about, your books, they want to get them, what's the best place? Just go straight to Amazon?
Yeah, I mean, that's the best place to go. If you go through my website, that just has more information on me. The purchase links will take you directly to Amazon. Yeah, if you go to Amazon and look up my name, Harrison Stockland, or just Stockland, it'll show right up. My mom is, like I said, a serial entrepreneur. She also has a book, so she might show up as well. But I have more books, so mine should mine should overtake her.
No
But
competition.
yeah,
No, none, right?
what's that?
No competition.
No competition. Nope. Nope. Yeah. So if you go to Amazon and you look up my name, my author profile will show up, and you can go ahead and follow me on Amazon. And what that'll do for you is you'll just get an alert whenever I release a book. So you'll get 2 alerts a year. It shouldn't blow up your phone or anything like that. You're not going to get emails and all that. It'll just let you know when I've released something. And you can check it out, see if it's for you, and if it's not, just wait for the next one.
I love it. And everybody knows, I've got my handy pen. because I love to write notes when I'm having
Yeah.
these conversations, Harrison. And so I wrote some notes that I just want to share that I think they were golden nuggets for me. I love how you talked about how you had this appreciation for the arts growing up. You had family members that illustrators that did different things, and you know you ended up leaning into this during COVID because you were like, man, I'm bored playing video games. Let
Yeah.
me go read a book. And there's so many people after high school that don't pick up a book ever
Yeah.
again, right?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you're like, not only going to pick up a book, I'm going to write my own, and that's really really cool. So many people reinvented themselves during COVID, and it's interesting to me that that was kind of one of your impetus to do it. Um, you talked about how you love to weave in historical elements, and that localized fiction allows you to kind of take a step back into what it's a simpler time and be able to be creative around it because you're not tethered by some of the modern day things like cell phones that could hold you back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you have a past in supply chain, and so we talked about how you kind of were adjacent to over the road trucking through your father, and that led you to the truckload lobby and Capitol Hill, and gave you a real appreciation to things that truck drivers go through. And even though that has not yet made it into your writing, I think it resonates a lot with our listeners because of the supply chain aspect that most of my guests bring to the table. And I think it's really cool that you have that appreciation, and you're able to acknowledge that even in your day job and in your writing part of your life. And we talked a little bit about growing up, the reason why you were able to lean into different things is because your parents encouraged you just to try things of interest. Stop talking about it and go for it, I think you said. And I love
Yeah.
that. It's like, just go. If you're going to talk about that much, there's obviously an interest. There's something that's pulling you
Right.
there. Lean into it. We talked about how momentum is key for you. It allows you to have consistency, and that helps you stay moving forward on what your goals are. That means you write every day or edit every day, and that's like a non-negotiable. We talked also about mindfulness, and so you mentioned that knowing yourself and being in tune to what your energy is going to drive whether or not you're going to have a good writing day or a bad writing
Yeah.
day.
Yep.
And the malleability of characters, right? You're not locked in on something. And so everybody can take that to heart, I think, either in their work life or their personal life, is that people aren't locked into that. If you have a set vision for somebody, they're going to end up being that no matter what. And you might as well have a positive spin on where they could be. So this was great. It was a really interesting conversation, Harrison. I appreciate your time this evening and sharing your story with the Might in Motion community.
Yeah, it was great. I love talking to you, and I hope I can talk to you again.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Might in Motion. Remember, every step forward counts, and the power to create momentum starts with you. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It makes a huge difference. Until next time, stay inspired, stay mindful, and keep moving with might.